Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to this episode of ZNL. I am very excited today because we have a special group of guests, the amazing influencers, Instagrammers, and a cat. Some of them joined us at the EU Influencer that we had recently. So welcome to the show, Annelies, Chiara, and Klaudia. Very, very happy to have you here today. And you shared with us a lot of thoughts and insights at the EU Influencer event. And I want to go back to some of these questions. And what I thought was really interesting to maybe explore first is, what got you started on this journey, and how's it been so far? And I'll turn maybe to you, Annelies. And you are working in a European organization where part of the topics that you cover personally are also connected to your work. So maybe tell us, how did you get started and how's it going so far?
Thank you so much, Phil, also for Philip for having us today. So for me, as I briefly mentioned during the ZN event, it was actually specifically after the Belgium elections and the European elections, because I was following a lot of, feminist pages and influencer pages talking about the gender backlash that we're seeing, the anti-feminist movements that we're seeing. And I've seen that also in my own country, how it was affecting the youth, how it was affecting how they were voting. And I realized that something needed to be done. And I've always wanted to talk about gender equality because it's also something that I studied for all my degrees. It's also something that I work on in my current job as well. And so I decided to launch Her Voice EU to make gender equality more accessible and inclusive to not only other people, EU experts and so on, but also young professionals who want to work into the field, other people such as your brother, your sister, who might not be experts on a topic, but just want little sound bites of what is gender and AI, what is gender and climate change, how are these topics interconnected, but also to kind of make gender equality and feminism accessible to young boys and men, because that's also a focus on my page, is trying to get men more engaged into feminism and gender equality. And so far, because I've launched Her Voice EU in March this year, it's been going really well. I've been very happy with the progress so far. It was a lot of learning, a lot of trial and error. I'm still in the trial and error phase, learning what posts, what topics are working. Sometimes some, work don't work as well. Some work really well. I think, to be completely honest, one of the things I'm definitely struggling with is trying to stay up to speed with a lot of what's happening around the world in my field. Because if I would have to post on every single thing that's happening slightly related to gender, I don't think I would sleep at all.
Yeah, and I think it's a very ambitious goal, and obviously you're tackling a huge topic which is being discussed on social media in a very engaging way. Some people are extremely emotional. Now, I remember you posted something on adolescence, both on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and I just wanted to ask you specifically on impact. I mean, what is the piece of content that you posted that had the most impact, or that surprised you the most, and in what way was that the case?
I think that's a very good question, because now that you asked it, I actually think about what's impact, first of all, because is it the many people that like the post? Is it the people that engage the most? Is it the people that save the post most? Because I have a few different ones based on, if we take that for impact, is it the most likes? Is it the most saves? Yeah. And actually kind of building up on the comment that you made from the adolescent post, is actually a post that I made on our men and women growing apart. So there's a study that they did, how young people are growing apart when it comes to gender equality. And I would say that was a post that got the most impact, because in a very short amount of time, the comment section just kind of blew up. There were people actually engaging with each other. People were sharing their thoughts about the topic, saying whether they agree or disagree with, that they're growing apart, mentioning, I also had a few young men raising the point that there's no issue about gender equality. There were also a few comments that maybe were not my cup of tea, but it just made me show that this is definitely a topic that still needs to be discussed and that needs to be explained a bit more about, well, why are young women and men growing apart? Why is gender equality such a big topic? Why are still some young people, and especially men, still feeling a bit reluctant and defensive when you bring up gender equality and feminism? So that's definitely one post that for me did really well. Also just interesting to see the reaction that it created for people. And I also remember that it also actually had a lot of people saving the post. I think it was almost 100 saves, which I think that for me meant there was an interest behind the post. And it also made me decide, well, this is definitely some of the topics that I want to pursue in next posts, to kind of, have that kind of hook to get people engaged in the topic, but also creating my posts in a way that have an impact, to have discussion and dialogue, because that's also one of the aims of Her Voice EU, is to get people to engage and to discuss with one another, of course, in a safe space. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, some of the comments weren't as positive, and every time I reply saying, please, this is a safe space, do not, disrespect one another. So far, it hasn't been that bad, but I will always advocate for making sure that people can engage and have dialogue, but it needs to be respectful in a safe space.
Yeah, I really, I'm very impressed with, it's a difficult topic to engage in. And I think a lot of people might be apprehensive, thinking if I go out there, you hear that from a lot of people. It's like, if I put something out there, I'm going to be attacked and it's going to be terrible. And it happens to some people, they get trolled, they get attacked, and it can be a very difficult experience. And you've picked, something that in today's environment, there's a huge discussion. You mentioned Andrew Tate. I've spoken to young men. I have a boy and a girl, well, actually, a man and a woman as kids. And, for them, they have friends who are like kind of, being absorbed into these conversations, and it can get extremely polarized and very difficult. So I think it's great that you're bringing that conversation. Did you have anybody come up to you kind of after reading it and say, hey, I read your post and it made me think, or they had a reaction from that face to face?
I had some reactions, not specifically on these posts, about the more, men and women growing apart, or the manosphere or the women's sphere. I had people engage in the comments saying like, oh, I agree or disagree, or, oh, this is also interesting, you should look into this. The posts where I actually got more of an engagement of people resonating were actually the career tip posts that I do. Whether it's on networking or seeing what kind of opportunities there are in the EU bubble and so on. And I'm sure that Chiara and Klaudia have the same interactions as well sometimes with people when they share these opportunities, because it's still also something that still feels a bit unknown to a lot of young professionals. And it's actually on those posts that I get the most interaction, and people messaging me on LinkedIn like, oh, I saw your post on Her Voice EU, that resonated with me. The networking post did really well as well on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And actually, funny enough, today there was a young professional who reached out to me saying, like, I've been following Her Voice EU since the beginning. Would you have time for a coffee anytime soon? And it just shows that there's clearly some kind of, it's resonating, the post that I'm doing. And that just empowers me more to keep going and to build this community and this network of young professionals in the EU Brussels, but also hopefully one day a bit further beyond as well.
Great. Now, turning over to you, Chiara, you have a very interesting story, and you shared it. And I don't want to hear more about this persona that you've actually created online, which is very different from your professional life, because you work in the parliament and you're really talking about topics that are personal to you. So I'd like to ask, how do you get started, and maybe how do you separate your professional persona from the one that you've created online? And does it sometimes come up in conversation at work?
Well, first of all, you have us all here because, as you said, we are EU influencers. So we talk about European topics. I do work for the European Parliament. So there's already things that like mingle and merge, and it's like kind of the same topic. Actually, my intention with being more public online, and as you said, building a persona, I first had this intention because I work in a parliament and I am also a writer. And so for writers, it's always very important to like have a persona, which doesn't mean it's not the real you. It's sort of a brand, And actually, to me, it's maybe completely different from how you would expect it, because I do not have like a persona and a work person and a personal person. It's all the same. And I don't think that would work in any European institution or organization. I think it works very well in the parliament because the parliament is fueled by, let's say, real people. And especially, I feel like in my party, I am from the Liberal Party in Austria. The Liberal Party in Austria is also very social, but nearly every party in Austria has a certain overlap. So I feel very comfortable anyway in like Austrian politics. And also my team in my office is very encouraging. Even my bosses, I have 2 MEPs, so members of parliament. As bosses, they're super encouraging. They sometimes repost the things that I do. So there really isn't any disconnect, I would say. And also, for me, it's never a persona because I really am the way I am online, also as a person, which is basically just because I do not have the headspace to like portray myself as someone online that I am not in real life.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because for a lot of people, this is a really challenging part of the online conversation because they feel, oh, if I can't really post too much of my personal opinions because it might clash with my organization, so they struggle with that. So it's very interesting that you have this kind of integration, which I think is actually really great. Now you said, and I reposted this because I love that quote, which is that if you were cut, you bleed blue and yellow, which it's a very memorable quote. But what you meant by that, as far as I understood, was that you had a real passion for Europe. And, if you read the news today, it's so negative and depressing and polarizing. And, the news cycle is just all about war and Trump and tariffs and crisis and everything. And even in the EU bubble, it's become quite skeptical and quite negative. So, I mean, do you have like this kind of, do you think it's a young, naive optimism, or do you think that maybe there's an undercurrent of positive energy that's just not being expressed at another level? And do you feel that it's your job to bring that story forward?
I would say also I'm not really worried about that part because I personally, what I share online and what I advocate for, although I work in a parliament and I work in politics, is not that political per se. What I am trying to do is like making people understand that they are first and foremost Europeans. Whether you know about the politics in Brussels, whether you know about the politics in your country, you are European. And therefore, whatever is going to happen in the future, and also like most people right now, I am scared, but I'm still hoping for the best. But whatever is going to happen, it's not going to change that we live on the European continent, most of us in the European Union, and we are Europeans. And I think before we can do anything else, it's very important that we also feel European, because the future, we can only make it good and bright if we stop arguing if we want to be in the European Union in the first place. And to do that, we need to build European identity. And what drives me in that regard is just my personal experience. And actually, I was just thinking about this the other day because it's a memory that I kind of forgot, but it's really deep inside me. And I have it, like, I can see it in front of me. I was a teenager, 12, 13, 14 maybe. And I was consuming Nickelodeon, of course, and all the pop stars and celebrities and all of this. And so remember, I went to my mom and I was like saying to her, oh God, I wish I lived in the USA. Like, it looks so glamorous. Everybody seems so important there. And like my mom was looking at me like, what is this child saying? And she was like, why would you want to live in the US? Like, you live in Europe. It's so good here. Enjoy. And I was like, no, the US is so much cooler. And now that I'm grown up, I would really, really like to stay in Europe because I really think it's a great place to live. But it just shows me that how uninformed I was as a teenager, like how great this place even is. And the USA just has a great marketing, and it has a great like common public space. And that's the one thing that we don't have. And so we don't have the Nickelodeon shows, we don't have the celebrities. And I really think that we need that.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting, and I suspect that the image of the US is kind of going through a bit of a crisis because obviously, we're going to have a whole administration of the current narrative, which is put America first, essentially, which is not going to be very encouraging for people who are not American. But also, there's a lot of polarization, a lot of conflict, and I think you're right in saying that there's something really interesting and powerful in Europe, which is not being told. And I would say that it's more that people experience it like you, and I think Annelies and Claudia, we all have a kind of experience of Europe that we think is positive. Everything's not perfect. There's a lot of problems, but we're not hearing, I feel, a lot of that positive story. And we were involved in a project several years ago called Discover EU, with the intention of giving a free Interrail ticket to all 18-year-olds. And the idea was that the Interrail experience makes you understand Europe firsthand. And so for me, and it's like, what is Europe? It's traveling without borders. It's meeting people from different cultures. It's being curious. There isn't a uniform culture. That's what makes it rich and diverse. But we agree that curiosity, that culture, that mixing is so fascinating. So I think it's a really interesting topic. And Claudia, I want to come over to you because you have a very interesting focus on a very specific topic, which most people might find, very complicated, not particularly easy to understand. So maybe tell us a little bit about, what made you start on that specific topic? How does it link to your professional work? And how's it going so far?
Yeah, sure. So actually for me, it was very personal. I think I mentioned that to you before as well. To explain why I talk about this, you have to understand where I come from. So I'm Polish, right? But my socioeconomic background was complicated. So I always was astonished by my colleagues, my friends going abroad, for example. It was not something very accessible to me for a long time. And actually, first time I went was literally when I was already a young adult, a teenager. And then I started to discover things about politics, how it's the world literally opened up for me a bit. So learning about EU and choosing to study EU, it was not like a strategy. It was for me a survival, because I started to discover all those great opportunities. And I started to discover that, for example, I could go abroad and live there 6 months. Hey, Erasmus. And it was very personal to me because I didn't believe I could do it. When I was writing my thesis, for example, some uncles from one side of my family, they said, "Oh, we don't care about like the EU funds because I can handle how much people want to pay for my cows, like I don't need subsidies, I don't need things." I'm like, but I don't think you know how it works. I don't think you know how much you actually gain from all of this, how much security you have. Even when we talked about the US, comparably to US, we have so much granted thanks to that, thanks to the EU. So I was like, okay, if I discovered by my own research so many opportunities, so many things I can apply for and get there, and even though I'm from Poland, I was like, okay, I want to talk about it. So this individual capacity building was always very important for me, and I'm very passionate. I love big conversations. But when I actually discovered that I can bring it on the more policy level, where I'll say that's not about me being from Poland, but about very tiny villages, regions in Poland that don't understand that they can apply for. They don't have a capacity because they don't have money, and they will not have money because of the capacity. So I was like, okay, that's such an unfair, thing. So that was a topic that I was like, okay, let's bring it up. I started to write about this on LinkedIn a little bit, but LinkedIn is intimidating, guys. I don't know how about you, but I I was looking for something else, and where I heard about the masterclass, I was like, maybe that could be my platform. So I'm learning, and I'm learning because I am a communication professional, but I have never did a design, for example. So to kind of challenge myself to do design, be it videos, be it carousels that educate, super tough. And I'm astonished, like I'm very impressed by all of us here doing that and all the guys out there. And it's not connected to my work, so it's hard sometimes to keep up, to find the time. But as long as I'm passionate about it, I will fight for no gatekeeping, more capacity, etc.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because as I hear you say this, and I was thinking about that when I heard you on the panel discussion at the EU influencer event, which is that you are all very enthusiastic and positive about the EU story, but you're not doing it in a kind of canned way where you're part of a program showing young people who like the Commission. You're actually saying a real story. And I think that resonates infinitely more than those kind of attempts to try to make Europe positive. And I was really very inspired by that. And I think a lot of people were also feeling there's something interesting here, something that we're not hearing from other places. And that that's missing, I think, from the EU conversation, because journalists just love conflict. They're attracted to negative stories. If it bleeds, it leads. And so I think there's been a real shift. I just want to go back to you, Chiara, with a question on your content. As I was asking Annelies, is there a piece of content that had an impact that surprised you, or that or somebody came and said, "Hey, I read that post and it changed my life"?
Well, I don't know if it's been life-changing so far. I had one, yes. I published it on Instagram and TikTok. It's real, and I talk about Sex and the City and the EU institutions. So what I'm doing is I'm comparing the characters from Sex and the City to the institutions. Like I say, for example, Miranda, I think I said, is the Commission, because she's like super direct and she does all the work and yada, yada, yada. And this really resonated with people because it was, I think, a fresh take. It was a pop culture take also. And I like to do this. I like to incorporate pop culture because I think just it makes things more fun. And what I really liked is I got some comments from people saying like, oh my God, like I studied the European institutions, or I went to the College of Europe, for example, but I never really got it. And now I watch this 1 minute reel, and now finally I get it. It was the same for me when I prepared the reel, because I also in school, we had very great education. They told us a lot about the EU, but I couldn't get it into my head. Like, who does what? Like, I have no idea. And when I prepared it, and when I matched it, and Carrie is the parliament because she talks all the time like the parliament, then it finally clicked and it made sense. And what surprised me is that it wasn't only ordinary people who watched the reel and got excited by it. It was also people from the EU bubble here, really high up people who you would think maybe they think they're above it. Like, this is silly. But they actually also really liked it, and that was really encouraging for me to hear.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think, by the way, I just want to say we will put all your accounts in the show notes, and they'll be shared. But I think it's very interesting, this translation work, because people don't understand. I think, Klaudia, you mentioned this as well. They don't understand what the EU does. And again, the EU is very complicated. There's a lot going on, but there are stories that need to be told for people to understand why this is worth doing, and again, worth getting involved with, and worth trying to shape. So I think that communication, if you don't communicate on something fantastic you've done, nobody will know about it. And we often tell clients this is like, hey, you've done this amazing project and nobody knows about it. So you might as well it's like if you printed 1,000 brochures and just put them in a cupboard. It's like, there is no point. And as an artist, because you're all to some degree artists, if you create something, in the end, you want to share it with somebody. If you don't share it, then it just stays. It's your kind of your hobby on the side that you haven't shared with anyone. Now, Klaudia, going back to you, you've picked this topic that is much more difficult. Have you made a Sex and the City analogy on one of your posts?
I don't know. I can be as good as Chiara in that. Sorry. But I am fan of bringing the policy topics kind of in your real life, especially when you show that you failed. Like, because organizations or companies or politicians, real people high up, they cannot really show that they did something wrong, that there was a mistake, that they failed. And I think when we are showing it on like very small things, everyday stories, and we kind of link the message, it really, really works. For example, my best video was about me failing Blue Book twice, the application for Blue Book, and really it exploded. Like, I never seen that before, because people found themselves reassured that this is fine. If you get accepted third time, you have all the other possibilities to do in the meantime. So it was great. The same, for example, when we try, organizations try to promote certain events, for example, right? It's very easy to put it out there and kind of hope for the best. But I tried to do that, didn't work. What worked best was actually putting it behind a message where I created the secret Brussels calendar, how it really works for the year ahead. What are the key moments? This was so useful. People found it really interesting. And there, I still did promote the event that I wanted to promote in the first place.
Right. And Annelies, if I come back to you on the, you talked about, having some kind of pushback comments, and, maybe because, as I said, you're picking a difficult topic, and also I think Chiara mentioned or the intimidation of posting on LinkedIn. Sometimes when it's like you don't know what the audience is going to look like or judge you. So how do you approach people who criticize your content, and how do you prepare yourself mentally for that to happen? Because obviously you're not always going to have great, your content is sometimes going to be not that great. So how do you approach that?
I think that is a great question, because I'm still trying to figure that out myself. On LinkedIn, it's been fine, because I do try to keep it just posting like professional EU policy topic, not really going into the more stronger hook topics that I know are not really made for LinkedIn audience. So that, it's a very professional. And I do remember having a comment by someone on LinkedIn, though, on one of my posts when I spoke about AI and gender. Why did I talk about gender equality and not sex equality in AI? And then I had to explain, like, well, this is my reasoning. Like, for me, sex equality means there's the two sexes in society, whereas for gender, for me, it means every single gender that is on, in the society that we have. And, gender is, for me, not only man and woman, it's also non-binary appearance, all the people that do not have a specific gender or want to identify to one specific gender from the heteronormative way that we see in society. And it was just, saying, this is my point of view. I'm not disagreeing with you. This is where I came from. And then there was a bit of an exchange. The person understood it. I mean, she didn't reply anymore. So I think she understood it, or at least she didn't want to engage anymore. But so it was more for me going back on my academic knowledge, researching a little bit as well, understanding, okay, where's this person coming from? Why is it coming from sex equality, gender equality? And then just, trusting my expertise on the topic as well and my reasoning behind it. So that's a bit different in LinkedIn. Now there I fall back on my expertise. On Instagram, I've had some comments, as Klaudia kind of mentioned, sharing her expertise, her experience, about the Blue Book. I shared also the same thing, how I went from hotel business school to then political science, and adding my minor and my women's studies specialization. And then there was a comment from, I'm assuming it was a man, looking at the profile, that it was saying like, oh, well, that's kind of a step down going from business to advocacy. And that, that's the kind of comments that you can expect, and I know that they're going to come still. But I kind of replied in a fun way. I was like, well, to each their own. And I could kind of did the nail emoji, just being like, it's your choice, that this is my choice. It doesn't hurt me, whatever. So in these kind of settings, I kind of reply with a joke. But I've also had some comments about, how, well, a woman's job is to just to make babies. Is just on one of my posts. And at that point, I just said, like, on this point, we will disagree. That's your opinion. I don't agree with this topic. And the person got a little bit aggressive to me in the comment section. And they're just sort of like, look, if you're not going to be respectful to me or the people in the comments, then I'm just going to block you. Didn't get to that point. But this is also, I think, the important thing is just to be able to be honest with yourself and to protect your mental health, because, as you stated, we are putting ourselves out there. I'm also paying attention to where I film, what I film, so that people don't recognize my backgrounds and stuff, because I know from other, celebrities and people talking about this topic that they get to a point where they get death threats and people, and I don't, it might get to that point. So I'm already preparing myself mentally and taking the steps when I need to. So when it gets to that point, I know I can protect myself the best way possible.
Yeah, I think it's it's very important to just navigate that and be comfortable with where you land. And indeed, we've worked on campaigns where people can get very aggressive. I do find that that Brussels still has a kind of modicum of I would say, kind of health in the discussion. It's not as toxic as I see it in some countries or in the US. Which I think is great. I hope it continues. And I think it depends on communicators, because sometimes to get more clicks, you have to be more aggressive. And sometimes it's the algorithm that's pushing you to be, more extreme. Now, Chiara, you said that you were, the same person online as in reality, which is always risky, because it means that you're putting yourself out there. So how has it been for you in terms of getting maybe more difficult comments? And do you feel that the environment in which you operate is quite healthy, or there's a toxic piece to it? Because there was this, by the way, on Twitter before, which it got gradually more and more toxic, even before Elon took over. And there were already people saying, oh my God, it's too much, it's just too aggressive. So I'm wondering, how's your experience, and how do you keep yourself sane and moving forward when you get kind of criticized?
Yeah, actually, I was quite scared about this before I started posting regularly. But I have to say, online, I haven't really had intense problems with it. I do have, quote unquote, problems in real life when I go back home, but not because of my social media, but whenever someone mentions that I work for the European Union, which is always very sad, because I've been to what we call in Austria a Buschenschank, which is a very local regional restaurant. And I go with my two grandmothers, and my one grandma, she wants to brag a little bit. So we meet someone that she knows him from God knows when. And she's like, oh yeah, we're here with my granddaughter because she's so rarely in Austria. So we took her out to have some food. And she works for the European Union. And then this guy goes oh, so you're the one stealing our money. But he was that serious about it. And another time I went also to a restaurant with my parents, and my dad, also really proud, is yeah, she works for the European Union. And the guy was it was the owner of the restaurant actually. He was oh, I do not want to talk about this because the European Union is starting a war. So if we go on talking about this, I must ask you to leave, basically.
Wow.
And this is just heartbreaking, because here is my dad, here is my grandmother, and they want to be proud. And I'm also proud what I do for a living. And that's just, it's not a nice feeling. It's not all of the Austrians, of course, thank God, but just knowing that whenever I get home, there is a chance of that happening is not nice. Online, I've had a troll only once, and it was a topic that was not even super European Union focused, but more leaving the EU, because it was talking about Brexit. And not even explicitly. When I did research for the novel I'm writing currently, I lived in London for a while, and I went to the I'm not really sure how you call it because there are so many names, but I think it's like the EU delegation in the UK or something like that.
Right.
And I interviewed someone, and he gave me like a really good quote that I wanted to use. And he said, when we left the EU, when Brexit happened, all of us working here in the UK, we became ghosts because we had basically no job anymore. And so I made it into a little poem and I posted it online, and then it really, really blew up. There were like hundreds of comments, really. And then see, the video also thinks it's not so great that I got trolled. So it blew up, and then I had this one comment when it kind of clicked for me, because one person was like, oh, you British people, you British girl, like first you want to leave the union and now you want to be all sad about it. And then it clicked for me. This person thinks I am British. This person doesn't even know who I am. So whatever these people are fighting about, and if they're attacking me, it's really not about me, because he doesn't know the first thing about me.
Yeah, and Claudia, you said that you wanted to be talking about things that were a big deal to you, and that you don't care what other people think. So I think that there was a very interesting passion underneath that, saying you want those stories to be told. Do you get pushback on your content, and do people say, hey, you're overthinking something, or what's been the reaction to your content from most people?
Yes, I think because, as you mentioned, it's quite a niche topic to talk about regional development and budget negotiations and stuff like this. I think the problem, except the trolls, which I also experienced, this is a bit tricky, because what are the rules on, reacting to this or blocking? I don't know if somebody talks about war. But really, on my side, the problem is, I think, to really sell the message I'm trying to say in such an easy way that there will be any reaction. That's the problem. Sometimes people, they like because it's visually engaging, but I really want them to understand. And that's something I'm really working on, to kind of make people think and make people debate with me and make them comment. So this is a tricky part of my content that I'm doing.
Right. So now I want to go to your recommendations for young people. So my question is basically, from all the things you've learned, in your experience, which has been quite short in terms of communication online, what are your big takeaways? And maybe you can say, what do you recommend to people who want to get started? So what is your tip for them? And maybe also for, older people like myself and a lot of people in the EU bubble. So what do young people need to do, and what do these older people need to do? Maybe I'll start with you, Annelies.
I think for any kind of tips or recommendation for anyone who kind of wants to start on EU communication would just be to not overthink it and just to go for it. This is also coming from personal experience. I was thinking about like, oh, it needs to be perfect, and it needs to be this, and I need to because I am talking about a topic that is has a spotlight, and it can be very polarizing, and it is kind of a hot topic in a lot of discussions. But the more I was overthinking it, the more I made it harder also to communicate the message I wanted to communicate. And so that's the other thing as well. And I think Chiara and Klaudia, and I even think you, Philip, will agree with me on this, is trying not to overcomplicate the message, because if you're already struggling to explain it, then the people who are going to read it are not going to understand you. So what I always try to do is, I've always started these conversations with my brothers and my dad. I'm kind of the person who made them think twice about certain things when they, read a topic on gender equality. Or my dad, who works for the foreign ministry, he was like, oh, well, I'm writing this briefing, but these words seem off. And he texted me and saying like, is this how I'm supposed to write it? And for me, it's like, and then when I try to explain this, well, why is this relevant for women and men, or, minority groups and so on, I try to explain it to them as clear as possible, because I have to remember the people who are on the other side are not experts. And you need to be able to make them understand what you're trying to say. So that's one. Those are the two little recommendations I would have. And for the more senior people, I think it's to listen to the young people. about, because they have experiences and knowledge that, you know, they don't have time to you know, I mean, let me rephrase it. For me, it's I think a lot of, and especially if you look at people, you know, in the EU bubble, politicians and experts, they always think like, oh, we know best. But we're the ones experiencing a climate crisis. We're currently experiencing a housing crisis. Like, I don't think I'll be able to buy a house anytime soon, but they're not listening to me because they think, oh, well, you don't know enough. You're still very young. So it's really finding that bridge between our lived experiences as young people, young professionals, and their expertise and knowledge being more senior in the policy field, and bridging that gap to be able to communicate and bring the message across to everyone, no matter the age or you know, where you're from.
Thank you. Klaudia, what is your advice to young people who are getting started and to older people who need to learn?
I just wanted to confirm what Annelies said. I test my content on my friends who are working in statistics. That's a very good tip, I would say. If they understand, that means people will understand, hopefully. For me personally, for young people who would like to do the same or work generally in EU comms, I think it's really to consider the fact that you don't need to create God knows what, such a big, amazing message, life-changing. Really, if you imagine that 50 people who follow you, 100 people who follow you, or maybe one day 500 will sit with you in the room and listen to what you say, that's amazing. You just get that perspective and imagine them sitting with you and listening to what you're saying. So this really helps me every time I kind of struggle with, you know, imposter syndrome. And for the older people, I think, as I said before, just try to be a little bit more real, a little bit more silly. So yeah, follow our tactics.
Excellent. Chiara, what about your advice?
I've written some things down here. It really doesn't depend on age, I don't think. I think, first of all, try to think about what is it that you personally would like to see. What is something that actually you would find interesting? What is something you're missing online, offline, wherever? If you have that and you actually need to produce the content afterwards, it can get tedious, especially if you do it once a week, twice a week, or even more. So I think to keep it going, you need to find something that you're actually passionate about. So find one thing. Is it the scripting of the text? Is it doing the video, filming it? Is it editing the video? Is it making a fun thumbnail? Is it writing the caption? Whatever it is, find one or two things that you're excited about, because you will not be excited about the entire process. So what do you want to see? Find something you're passionate about it in the process. And then afterwards, for goodness sake, don't take it too seriously. Really don't. Have fun with it.
I think that's great advice. And it's true, you know, we all experience a form of imposter syndrome, or, you know, I think when I write a post, even on LinkedIn, the one I did just after the event, I was trying to figure out something interesting, because obviously there's a lot of posts about, you know, the EU influencer event, different perspectives. So I'm trying to bring a new perspective. And I think at some point you just have to say, look, I'm just going to say what I want to say and just put it out there and see what happens. And that's why I think we discussed this before. It's all about it's a form of online diary, like, you know, the blogs were online journals where you're just sharing your perspective with the world, but you're writing for yourself as much as you are for other people. So I think that's part of the process. Now let's move to your recommendations of a book recommendation, movie recommendation, whatever you think would be interesting for our viewers. So Klaudia, I'll start with you. Do you have any exciting things that you're listening to, watching, what you'd like to share with our audience?
I think I really recommend a podcast I'm listening to. It's called 80,000 Hours. Yeah. And it's something that bridges, you know, this professional curiosity about topics in the world, but at the same time bringing it very easily and accessibly. It's also nice to listen when you cook or walk. But at the same time, if you want to change something, if you are passionate, and you don't need to start Instagram, but maybe you can pick up one of the world-changing problems, you know, and go to Africa, work for an NGO. I don't know. that is a great podcast to listen to explore.
Thank you. And I think it's also a book. So if you're interested, there's the book and the podcast. Annelies, what is your recommendation? And you can have more than one.
Oh, okay. Because I was just going to ask if I can say two, because I have two.
Go for it. Go for it. You can even do two.
For me to change it, because it's a podcast and a book, but I'll start with the book first. It's one book that I'll recommend to anyone who is not as well versed when it comes to racism in society. It is a bit more UK focused, but I think it's still very relevant in any kind of society, especially in the European context. It's the book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. I read this book a few years ago when I was studying in Denmark, and it's always the same book I recommend to people when they want to know a little bit more. It's very easy to read. He goes into history and then goes to a more contemporary topic. So definitely recommend that one. And something, a podcast it's called A Bit Fruity, which is by Matt Bernstein. He is mostly focused on US topics, but he brings it. He's a journalist, former journalist. He also has a YouTube channel and everything, and he brings it in such a very constructive way that even if you don't necessarily agree with it, he makes you think about the different topics. And he goes from talking about what happened 2 weeks ago to talking about pop culture, and he presents it in a very easy way to understand. So those are my two recommendations.
Excellent. And we will be posting, of course, all these titles and authors in the show notes. Chiara, what are your recommendations?
I'm going to stick to pop culture once again. I think everybody should watch the series called Parlement, or in German Parlament, because the series is actually, I think it's trilingual. You have people talking German, English, and French. It is about working in or for the European Parliament. It follows different characters. It's incredibly funny. It gives you a little bit of an insight into the institution, but also it shows just people from different nations, which is really interesting. You also have like love interests from different nations and countries. It's really, really great. And actually, it's also fueled by people who work in the EU bubble. A colleague of mine was a script writer for it. So it really just, I think it's great that people come with their like own drive and they want to give back to the people and they want to inform people in Europe how great and how fun it is.
Yeah, I've actually heard references and recommendations for the show quite a few times, and I think it's another great way to get people to understand a bit more about what Europe is, even if it's on with a comedic aspect to it. So I want to thank all three of you for coming on the show, for sharing your perspectives, for inspiring people. I think in telling the story about Europe, doing it in your own time. It is quite challenging, and I'm sure we're going to see more of this happening. And I think you're going to inspire many other people to start telling better stories and really getting a conversation about the EU and driving that conversation. So thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. See you online. Bye-bye.
Hello. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.